Hello. Hello, good humans. I'm missing you in the room. Welcome to Bad Dog Studio in Ottawa, Canada, where I woke this morning to a fresh dusting of snow, which would explain the warm scarf. So let's take a few breaths to land wherever you may be. And before I begin, I would like to join my voice with yours in great gratitude for all of the essential workers who are certainly at the edge of things right now. And so noticing how you're in your body right now, I want to ask you how you are, but I'd rather ask, how is it in you? So today we are going to have a conversation about a grief. We're going to turn toward grief and wonder a little bit together about these times, and great gratitude to the folks at HealthFlix who are, wondering together about what is it in our days, what is it that we can bring to our days, what is it that we're to notice and to practice and to come to in these days. And I join with you in that. So before I get ahead of myself, perhaps I'll introduce myself. I'm going to share my screen now. Let's see how the gods of technology are with me right now. Indeed they are. Many thanks. So my name is Pittman, and I am the director of the School of Embodied Yoga Therapy here in Ottawa, and I'm a yoga therapist at the Ottawa Integrative Cancer Center. And that's where much of my work is with regard to cultivating a deep understanding of grief in our time. And, it strikes me a little bit that with my work with people who have cancer, they have experienced something, I'll say similar to what's happening with regard to the shock and surprise, perhaps, of these days. Maybe it's best said that the veil has been lifted, or the illusion shattered, perhaps, of what they thought would never happen, or what is surprising to them, or in fact, what they can no longer control. And it really is an illusion that we walk with. And when that veil is lifted, it can be so surprising to us. And in the work walking with them in cancer, I walk to listen to them, listen to their body, to acknowledge what is happening in their lived experience, to accompany them. And in the way of doing that, to really notice what's happening in their body. And often there's all kinds of sensations that come up. And as we dive into those sensations and listen well and gracefully, things begin to change. And it's not to at all erase the deep shock and fear and grief of the time, but to accompany ourselves and to notice what we carry, which is maybe not just our grief, but a deeper grief. And I would say that in these days, what I've noticed is that no matter where you are in your house, or if you're in the hospital or grocery store, stocking the shelves, bless you, thank you. What connects us really is the grief of these times, is what's really happening here. And so I've offered you this beautiful mandala or altar to also look at, and perhaps that's my way of offering something at your feet today, some beauty. And indeed, in these days of great wondering and uncertainty, there is so much beauty that is coming, isn't there? There's, all kinds of beautiful, incredible, my phone is ringing, guys. Incredible things that are being offered right now from, art and concerts and hearts and windows and all manner of beauty. And the mask making that's happening right now, I'm starting to think of masks as being prayer flags for your faith. It's just been an unbelievable time to notice what comes from this deep grief that's happening right now. And I hope that today, when we start to wonder together, we'll see that grief is much more than sadness. And so today, and I will tell you much more about the artist too, who made this beautiful one here. But as we start to approach grief and we start to approach the sensations in our own body, let's go gently and let's soften our approach, let's say, to these things. And no better than a poet to help us know more deeply and widely. So may I offer this to you from Kindness by Naomi Shihab Nye. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing, you must also know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrow and you see the size of the cloth. Oh, so beautiful. So much here. So much here. And I love this piece because it does point to speaking, to bringing words to what is noticeable. And that in these times, we are catching the thread, aren't we, of all the sorrows. And this cloth is immense. I hope today that what we are doing is fingering our way along the cloth of this immensity of what's happening in these days. And also, Naomi speaks to the idea that kindness and sorrow may not be opposites, that maybe one actually speaks to the other, or something arises in that place of sorrow. And in our culture, we have this idea, that there is such a thing as positive and negative. And negative seems to be all about sadness and fear and anxiety and all of these things. And that we're really only meant to pay attention to the other pile, which is the positive. And I wonder if we might at least suspend that belief for the moment as we come to know grief as something much deeper, and that it kindles really our love of life. And so let's come to that altar again. So what you're seeing before you is actually a practice. So the good man, De Shilkret, is the one who wakes in the morning and he gathers his basket and he walks a path and blesses all that he sees, gathering these ones that you see before you, and comes to make some deep beauty here. And this really is a practice of impermanence and honoring impermanence. And surely it is a practice of honoring grief, laying this before all that there is, all that we know, all that we connect to as human beings. And I wonder how it is for you when you look at this. Do your eyes soften to this? Mm-hmm. How it is in your body when you behold this. And for sure, you are working with your nervous system now. When I've been walking my days here and calling to the neighbors across the street, asking them how it is in them, I've been noticing some big sensations in me And they say the same. And the folks that I work with cancer, they say the same. And it seems to be that we have a way of knowing what's happening by paying attention to our body. And that grief lands here. And so when I've been noticing the tension around my eyes and my throat feels so constricted some days. And I don't know if it's a heaviness in my chest or it feels like something's landing there. It's hard to breathe against. And sometimes my stomach too. And these are a way of knowing how it is for me these days. And I don't make them wrong. But when I begin to feel into those, and I hope you'll forgive this personal example, but as I feel into these sensations, I wonder, what is this? Am I getting sick? What's happening here? And I begin to follow the breadcrumb trail of these sensations in me. And I become aware of the great sadness that I feel in being separated from my children. And is it the biggest grief that's happening right now? Maybe not, but let's follow the trail a little bit. So I begin to feel into this deep constriction and what I might say is the sort of the unmet sorrow or the unmet grief that's having its way. And as I feel into that and I start to feel actually some change in the sensation, and I begin to become aware of this kind of expansion or deepening through my lungs, and I become aware of this great love that I have for my children and this great gratitude for them in the world, and that I might have a love so deep that it could be so hard on me to be away from them. And it leads me along this trail of feeling into the grief of other mothers who are separated and families who are separated, and it becomes bigger, but it's not harder to hold as I soften to it. And yeah, it takes me to my knees, and perhaps that's the way grief has its way with us too. It takes us to our knees. Better to bless the earth from that place, I think. So it's good to know that grief doesn't mean us any harm. And it is a way of knowing more deeply and feeling more deeply our love of life too. And so I'd like to offer a practice into this beautiful altar here to lay before you too in your days. And of course, many of us at HealthFlix have been talking about our nervous system, and I too am a nervous system geek. And, you know, sometimes we think about turning toward these big feelings, and we worry about that. But it's been my experience that as we turn toward what we feel in our body and what is in our days, that I believe it leads us into that ventral vagal part of the parasympathetic nervous system, and it deepens our connection to all that there is. Apologies. Yeah. So here's my idea about the practice, and it is to first attune to what is happening in us right now, and to find our way to our body. And it's hard to do if you're looking at a computer screen. Sometimes I find myself getting quite cognitive. So we'll do that practice to drop into our body. And then we will turn towards some of the things that are happening these days. And first, in that attunement, we'll notice if we are willing to do such a thing. Is there space? And by dropping into our body and practicing a little bit first, we'll develop the space, I think. Or we won't, and we'll be willing to continue to move, or to get up and go to another room, or to, you know, bring a cup of tea to someone. But if we continue along that path of turning toward these deep sensations in us and this deepening that could be. We'll follow the trail, and I will offer something that I've noticed in my days that I'm sure that you likely have some grief, some bigness that you can turn to as well. So absolutely be willing to turn down the volume of me, should you want to. And then we'll notice what happens in the sensations of us. And then we'll come back. We'll come back to taking care of and tending to what we notice in us. And I'll say again, this is not to erase anything that's happening in us, not to drop our eyes from what's happening around us, but instead to tune more deeply into it, actually. And may I say, to feel more. So let's begin, and let's find some breath first. Always a good idea, I think. As we come in, feel free again to close your eyes or to soften your gaze, and to notice how is it in you in this moment. So for you, it may be that stillness is your way to come to your body. For myself, it's much easier and much more available to me to come through movement. So may I suggest we just take a little bit of movement side to side, to feel into the movement itself, to notice the sensations of the movement, and perhaps to come out of our habit of just sitting with our eyes straight forward. Perhaps you notice your breath changing. Maybe there's another movement that comes as you start to deepen into the sense of you turning inward. And then let's come back to center, perhaps with a sense of an easeful exhalation. And notice any of the sensations in the body that you're walking with these days, as though we could turn toward them as we turn toward that beautiful altar. Notice what's happening around your eyes, your jaw. Notice what's happening in your throat. Notice what's happening in your chest, in your heart, in your lungs. Chinese medicine would say that the lungs are the place of grief. And while I'm not an expert in that at all, it's something to consider. And noticing your belly too. And as you notice these sensations, do they change just by your willingness to come to them with softness, with flowers? Does it create a little bit more space to consider some deep and big things? So noticing into now your willingness to consider turning toward these days that we're in. Notice if you have a willingness, kind of a leaning forwardness. And if not, continue to breathe and move and take care of the sensations that you're already noticing. So let's move into the second part of this practice, which is to open to consideration these big things. So you may be well attuned to this. You may be hearing stories. You may be seeing the news. And so you may already have something to work with there, but I'll bring something in as a consideration. Let's turn our awareness to what's happening in those long-term care homes. Notice, even as I say it, what happens in you. Take care of yourself here, move, breathe if you need to. Go gently, softly. So what's happening here in those long-term care places? The deep longing there of people to be together, and healthcare workers trying so hard. And perhaps the not enoughness in that moment. And yes, the dying. And as you hang out with that, as you consider being with that and the sensation in you, notice if anything's changing in your heart, in your chest. Not trying to erase anything, just being with. And in the story, of course, is the beauty of the love, of wanting to be together. Those hands pressed against the glass, eyes peering at each other through the glass. And maybe that's enough to say. And maybe there's something more here, that we have found ourselves in a place where we segregate our old ones together. And it has been like that before this moment. That's a harder thing to know. Notice what's happening in you. And dying alone is happening and has happened. And perhaps there's no comfort in this, but perhaps comfort is shallow in the place of knowing such a big thing and being willing to attend to it and tend to it. And maybe there's something rising in you about some way you'd like to proceed in the knowing of this. Some beauty that comes even from your hands. Or maybe sitting with this still. And if you're still with me, and if you are looking at the screen at this time, here is the dying of the altar. Here is the impermanence. And here is the beauty. So let's come back together here. Thank you for your practice. We're still in it, of course. And now let's again attend to what's happening in us so that we might widen our capacity. Yeah. Take care of ourselves, of course. Good practices with regard to deep nervous system knowing. Let's come back to some movement too. And so we'll come back to that rocking movement first. Come back to noticing the breath, perhaps the deep exhalation that might even be more available now. And feeling that deep heart connection. Well, let's come and move the spine as we sit. So that as you exhale, the chin comes toward the throat, the back of the shoulders widen, and perhaps you're curling down through your lower back. And as you inhale, come back. Belly comes forward, chest widens, and chin comes back to neutral. Just moving the spine, kind of like reassuring the nervous system. And continuing with that, or maybe just moving your eyes a little bit, looking around your space. Let your eyes be soft and take in the color or shape, the light of your place. These are movements that you wouldn't do if you felt threatened or in immediate danger. So maybe now is the time to reassure your nervous system of that. And then coming back to sit together, perhaps offering a breath of your practice today out to someone in your life or out to those ones who are deeply engaged in, well, let's say the trenches of how it is. And there are so many grief practices that we might enter into. I'm sure you have many yourself. And if you feel like you'd like more information about that or some good advice, I recommend that you turn to some of the old ones, maybe the ones that are still in our midst, or maybe your old ones, that they've seen some troubled times too, and there might be wise guides for you in these days. And so we're at the signpost time of our practice. There's all kinds of gratitude, of course, because it's deeply embedded in the grief. And so gratitude to you for coming, of course, and to the good people at Health Flicks, to Heather and Matthew and Leah. Yeah. And deep gratitude to my man, Day, for the beauty. And here are some resources. And we've gone, a certain way down this path of consideration. And I can't think of anyone more that I'd like to bring flowers to in this time. And Stephen Jenkinson's work, his book, Die Wise, the movie, the NFB movie, Grief Walker. I highly, highly recommend that you might bring this into your days. The good work of Francis Weller, his poetic way of turning towards sorrow and the deepening that we come to when we do. And in the middle, you see Day's book and his practice of grief and beauty, and maybe that will allow that to rise in you too in these days. And so this actually is an offering that we have from the school. We are offering some work for essential workers. May we be of good service in our time. And this is where you will find me most of the time, up here in Bad Dog Studio. And I pray that that our practice today has been of good service to, of course, you and your bodies and what you're walking through, but also to grief herself, and a way that we might turn our worry into prayers as we walk. So I'm so willing to hear any questions that you might have at this time. And if not questions, I wonder if you might be willing to write any grief practices that have come to you, or things that you're noticing in your body in these days. Good. Well, could it be that I really hope that we haven't solved anything here? Here is some, noticing lots of fatigue in the body. Yeah, fatigue certainly is a way that these things arrive to us, so that we might know more for sure. Feeling constricted. Yeah. Someone's saying that it's difficult to practice. Indeed, of course it is. Yeah, it is difficult to practice, and it's good to notice the first part of the practice, which is, is this the time for this practice? And it's true that many of us are in deep overwhelm, and having had a lived experience of many griefs or trauma, and it might not be the time to move toward this particularly. But at the same time, I have noticed that moving in that direction can be a way of moving into the ventral vagal parasympathetic, and a way of softening and hearing the unattended sorrows and the unattended grief that we carry in our body, ours for sure. And because we're such resonant human beings, we are aware of the grief of our time through our body too. Yeah. So all this is good noticing and good practice, and blessings on you and in your way of coming to your days. More questions. Yes, thank you for the gift. Yes, grief as connection, masks as prayer flags. Yes, to accompany ourselves in these times. And to, how is it that we can tend to these times? That, that we're not victimized by what's happening, but can rise in the way that we have practiced to this. Yeah. More questions. Yes. Clarify the purpose of a grief practice. Well, gosh, I hope I've spoken to that. That it is a way of tending to our bodies in our times, and a way of speaking to what's happening. That we don't, there's, in a village-minded approach, we're not all meant to be doing the same thing. We're not all meant to be at the hospital, and they'd like you to stay home, please. But that there are some ways that we can practice that tend to what is happening here. Lucy is a nurse working in the NHS. I'm noticing that whenever there is thanks or an offering to health workers, like just then when you mentioned online yoga therapy, that tears come. Not obviously grief, but gratitude. Yeah, don't they live together? Yeah, we have this habit of separating all of these things, but it's not easy to unpick, you say, and to notice. You're very welcome. Well, it's good work, and again, may this work and may our days be a blessing to life, that we might know life more deeply. And you're very welcome. And thank you too for coming and to attending to these things that that not everyone can send to right now. So blessings on your days, friends, and gosh, I hope to see you in person soon. But for now, it's good.